son's listening to it, so hi Marcus. People in Malaysia were going to listen to it, but they had a meeting. Sean couldn't listen to it. Maybe some in Canada, I don't know. Any in Canada, Barbara, listening? Could be listening from anywhere. So we welcome you all, whether you're here now or whether you're on the internet and looking at this, or whether you're watching this later on YouTube. Welcome to this wonderful occasion. It's my great pleasure now to ask Ian Tinney to come to the stage, because we thought about this for a while, and these lovely little chairs, Ian, do you want a hand up or not? Let's have a look. Here we go. We do have a doctor in the house.
There we are.
Did we get the other batteries for that, Michael? That was fading out. Michael will fix that up. What we're going to do is we thought that it was appropriate that on a night like this, when we were, congratulating Elroy for 50 years of service as a doctor, we looked in our club and we found that we had a doctor who'd been here for 32 years. Now, 32 years is not 50, and when you're playing cricket, anyone who's played cricket, you only get a clap when you get to 50 or 100. But 32, they go, that's all right, you've done your bit, but it's not 100 and it's not 50. So, with that note, I'm going to ask Ian some questions and we'll get his opinions about things. So, Ian, you've been retired for 8 years.
Yep.
Can you tell these young people out here what it's like to be retired?
Fantastic. Really is. It's called freedom. You have that situation where when you're at work, you're doing things that you enjoy, but there are also things that other people expect you to do. When you're retired, you do things that you enjoy, that you want to do. Nobody else has any say in it, whatever, and it's wonderful.
Ruth, have you got a point there you'd like to make? No. Okay. Well, you can butt in any time. You have that privilege.
Oh, she will.
She will. Ian, tell us about, you've been now, 56 years since you first registered as a doctor, got your registration as a doctor, Elroy.
Yeah.
So, where'd you work first?
Firstly, I was at the Queen Victoria Hospital for a year, then at Panch, and then I went into general practice and was in general practice ever since. Firstly at Tongala, up in the Goulburn Valley, in a one-man town. I tell you what, that's where you learn your medicine, when you're in a one-man town. I reckon I would have learnt probably 5 years medicine in that year. It was wonderful. Then I went to Blackburn for 6 years, and then came up here because I knew I really, at heart, was a country doctor, not a city one. It was good.
Being a country GP, I can only imagine from being a teacher, sort of the rapport that you get with the community. What is the thing about being a GP that really got to you most?
The people.
Yeah.
This has always been just a wonderful town, full of wonderful people, characters, and it's been obviously one of the most beautiful areas in the world to live in, so we really have to be feeling privileged for that. But mentioning that word privilege is really what we do. We are, as doctors, privileged to be able to look after some of the most terrific people in the world. They when I first came here, we had the only practice in town, when I joined, there was 4 of us. Then John Lockwood joined shortly afterwards, and we have Liz here tonight. I'm very glad to say. Then Peter came in, then June Fisk, and then of course Peter Trigg, who's around the corner there. So the clinic grew quite well and quite quickly. But at that stage, we had everything going for us. We were totally autonomous as far as what we did. We had the hospital to run for ourselves. Nobody told us what to do or how to do it or anything like that. It was just a matter of having a sick patient, you put them into hospital, you treated them, they left. And it worked very well.
So long as they left,
patients too.
They left to go back home and not via Keith Heritage, you were happy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Almost all.
Almost all, yeah. You mentioned the word privilege, and whilst it's a privilege for me to be here and interviewing you, can you tell me about the incidents that might have happened in that privileged time that you had with these interesting locals? Did you have any, for example, did you have any interesting locals that you and Elroy might have experienced?
Oh, there's people like Buck, of course, who everybody knows. There are many people who, and unfortunately there's not much that we're able to tell because as doctors, a lot of the interesting stuff you can't tell. When I was at Tongala, the guy who I took over from threatened to write a book about the town. He'd been there 10 years and it just about started World War III. Anyway, that's one of the problems that we've got, that yes, there are a lot of things that happened that even 30, 40, 50 years ago we still can't talk about.
There is one, though, that we are going to talk about, and that was an incident that happened with you being threatened, I believe, by a person who may or may not, allegedly, had been on drugs. And
oh, I'm sure he was.
Oh, you're sure he was? Okay. So Elroy stepped in. Tell us about that story.
This was a guy, I had just seen his grandmother, and I showed her out, and a couple of minutes later I heard this ruckus out the front. "Where's my bloody grandmother?" He was saying, you know, and at the top of his voice, making all sorts of music. And anyway, I went out and said, "Oh, she's left." But look, just anyway, he wouldn't calm down, and he started taking swings at me and this sort of thing. We ended up, I don't know whether anybody knows that little window that's on the side at the clinic that you can look through. Anyway, he was on one side of this, I was on the other, and we were taking punches at one another. And I got...
You were throwing punches?
Oh, yeah. Had to.
Okay.
Not very well, but I did.
They
anyway,
were therapeutic punches.
Anyway,
Yeah.
the girls pulled me off and told me to go out the back room, which I was more than happy to do at that stage. And but he raced up the corridor and came in the door, and he was in front of me. So there wasn't a window between us at that stage. So I got a bit worried. Luckily, Elroy had heard the commotion, and he followed him down the corridor and through the door and saw what was happening. So Elroy used some of the expertise that I think he had caught up with in South Africa, fighting God knows who over there, and he threw him down on the ground on his side and did a sort of tom-tom type of thing with his head between his head and the ground. It was going boom, 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 boom. Yes, he wasn't very well after that. So anyway, he finally got arrested and charged and convicted and everything. So yeah.
Okay. You mentioned Buck before, but like it's no show in Healesville without mentioning Buck, is it? I mean,
No.
he was a legend in his own time.
Yes.
Ian, in your time that you spent as a doctor, what have you seen change? And I know you've told me you couldn't go back to it because of the technological changes in there, but what was sort of your main concern as a doctor in your early years, in your mid years, and then in your latter years as a doctor? What have been the social issues or the presenting issues that you've had as a doctor?
Well, there've been many of them, of course, and the change has been enormous. And the things that I was taught and we were taught when we graduated, probably 70% of them are obsolete and the rest are wrong. So it really has been a totally different mindset that we've had to have. When I graduated, we had one idea in mind, and that was to cure people. Things have changed a great deal since then, so that prevention is better than cure, and so much of medicine these days is aimed at prevention, and it's so much more satisfying, really, when you can get in on the ground floor, as we do here. It may not be as clear cut as it was then, and the idea of curing people was very good for our ego at that stage. Perhaps it didn't happen all that often that we actually cured people. If you think about it, most people get better by themselves. And if they've seen a doctor at the time, sometimes the doctor can con them into the idea that they, in fact, were cured by the doctor, when in fact that probably didn't happen in the first place. There are many changes. I suppose the other thing that I do want to say, while I'm sort of just reminiscing, is the difference in the changes in general practice from what we had nearly 50 years ago and now. General practice then was really general. You did deliver your own babies. You looked after, you did your own surgery. You gave anaesthetics. You looked after everybody right from conception to the grave. And you had to be good at it too. It was said at that stage that a good GP needed to know about 80% of every specialty. And that was about right then. You can't really do that now. GPs would like to, but what they need to do now is to be able to look it up and to know where to look, and more than anything else, to know, and this is the same as it was then, to know one's own limitations, because that really is one of the most important parts of general practice, is knowing when to bail out, to know what you can do and to know what you can't do.
So, Ian, there's a good little segue to come in here for me, because there are some people that maybe you'd like to thank in that knowledge, because it's not just you as a doctor that had all that knowledge, is there?
No, I'd like to do that. I'd like to...
Good.
There's a whole group of people down the end there, that table down the bottom, where there are a lot of girls who we've been around together for so many years and who have done a wonderful job. And I, firstly, looking after the patients, and secondly, and much harder, looking after the doctors and coping with us. And that I'm sure has been difficult. But yes, I really do want to say thank you, a big thank you to them.
Well, thank you, Ian. And now I'd like to call on Share Smart and on our President Michael to come up here and maybe say thank you in another way. So, Ian, just stay on your little chair there. Don't get off, mate.
Okay.
It's dangerous.
Thank you very much, Terry. And Ian, it's been so lovely to hear about all the fantastic things you've done over the years. So I'm now joined by our past District Governor, Shea Smart, on stage, as we have a very special token of Rotary's appreciation to give you. So Ian, it gives me great pleasure tonight to present you with the Paul Harris Fellows Sapphire Award.
Thank you very much.
So the Paul Harris... So this is named after Rotary International's founder, Paul Harris, who was a Chicago lawyer who started in Rotary International with 3 business associates in 1905.
I'm amazed.
The presentation of a Paul Harris Fellow recognition is the Rotary Foundation's way of expressing appreciation for a substantial contribution to its humanitarian and educational programs. And Rotarians often designate a Paul Harris Fellow as a tribute to a person like yourself, who demonstrates a shared purpose for the objectives of Rotary and the Rotary Foundation. And today we have the honour and pleasure of recognising you as a Sapphire member of a Paul Harris Fellow. You were nominated by the Board of Healesville Rotary to receive this recognition as an expression of our appreciation for your 32 years of service as a doctor here in Healesville. It's because of gifts like this that are made in Ian's honour that the Rotary Foundation is able to carry out an array of programs that achieve beneficial changes all over the world. A contribution to the Rotary Foundation is an investment in goodwill, peace and understanding, and it is an ideal that is held high by Rotarians all over the world, and one that Ian Tinney clearly shares. Can I now ask those who can to please be upstanding? Ian, it now gives me great pleasure to ask our past District Governor, Shea Star, to pin the Paul Harris Sapphire pin on you.
Oh gosh, I didn't know I had to do that.
No pressure, Shea.
No, that's all right. You've just got to get it out.
It's nicely tucked away.
Can I leave the other one on there?
Yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, make sure I get it up the right way. There you go.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Ian, once again, thank you very much for your service to the community, and thank you very much. You can all be
I'm
seated.
speechless, I think. So thank you very much, Michael, Chair, and the board for having done that. The only other thing I do want to do, of course, is to congratulate Elroy for making that 50 years, which I didn't do, but yes, thank you very much.
Cheers.
Okay, so I think everyone now has had their main course. Yeah, we had a little bit of a glitch at the start, but what will be happening next? You'll have about 10 minutes. If you can squeeze it back to 5, I'd be happy. To get tea and coffee down there. Toilets, as Michael mentioned, are out the back. Another reminder, if you haven't got your raffle tickets, please do so, because it's a well worth winning raffle. And we'll have dessert. After dessert, I'll ask Alma if she'd like to come up to the lectern, and she's going to give a response to Rotary International. It's protocol in Rotary that when we give a toast to Rotary International, the head person in Rotary, which is in this case Alma, who's the district governor, will give a response on behalf of Rotary International. So we'll do that straight after, and following that, we will then interview Elroy Schroeder. So, cups of tea and coffee, dessert will be coming out. Have your tea and coffee with dessert, and enjoy. for yes, we're live. So don't do anything that you shouldn't. Welcome back, people who are watching this via the internet, and also to the people who are gathered here tonight. That was great hearing from Ian and the experiences that he had in his time at the Yarra Valley Clinic. But now I'd like to call upon Alma Reynolds, our District Governor, and Alma's going to say a few things on behalf of Rotary International in response to Ian's toast to Rotary earlier. Thank you, Alma.
Good evening. So it's my job to respond to Eon's toast, but it's such a long time ago, I wonder whether you remember what he said. Anyway, I'm going to respond to it whether you remember it or not. So I want to thank you, Ian, for highlighting, as is more than appropriate this evening, some of the health-related activities of Rotary in Australia and locally. There is no point in trying to discuss or even list all of the health-related projects in which Rotary is involved. Indeed, if one cares to think about it, the 7 areas of focus of the Rotary Foundation are all either directly or indirectly about promoting health and improved well-being. Ian mentioned the Polio Campaign, and indeed it is the single biggest project Rotary has ever undertaken, and when it's successful, it will be the enduring legacy from Rotary to the whole of humankind. Even in this age of COVID, Rotary has been in the forefront of action, implementing an emergency project fund for responses to the virus impacts and distributing the entire amount in record time. Rotary has also utilised its polio infrastructure in the COVID battle, using its monitoring facilities to track the spread and intensity of infection. And of course, if there is a need to distribute vaccines to some of the most crowded, difficult, or inaccessible parts of the world, all the while maintaining the cool chain, Rotary already has the networks and the expertise. Thank you, Ian, for your toast to Rotary International, and thank you to the Rotary Club of Healesville for choosing to honour 2 long-serving health professionals. This event is a celebration of just one example of the strong synergy between Rotary and the improvement of human health.
Whoa, this is better. Freedom. We'll get rid of this. And back on the little chairs. And I'd like to invite Elroy Schroeder to come to the chair. Do you want a hand up?
Pardon?
Do you want a hand
I
up?
was just wondering where the wheels of the Segway.
I think he does. It's look, I can get one with wheels if you prefer. No?
Health and safety issue, yeah?
Okay. Elroy, how are you feeling?
I don't know. Gordon Taylor just took my pulse. He said I'm okay.
Okay. And Peter, I hope you're feeling okay over there, because they tell me you've got, what, 37 years up or something? And that means in 13 years' time, Peter, you could be here. So just take notice. And if you want to take notes, that's okay.
Insist on better chairs, Peter.
Okay. You weren't kidding, were you? I told you were going to get a thrill out of this night.
Okay.
Okay, Elroy, How are you feeling after 50 years, mate?
I feel okay.
Feel okay?
Not too bad.
Right. Tell me, I think everyone here would like to know about the young Elroy. Who was Elroy when he was back in PE?
I was a nerd. I love scientific things. I was a kid that made crystal radios and one tube valve radios. And actually, as a kid, I did postmortems on chooks. My father had a chook run, and chickens were dying mysteriously. So one day I thought I'd have a look. Didn't know why they died, but anyhow.
You cut them up anyway.
Inquiring mind, I would say I had.
Mm. Did you have chicken tonight?
Did I have chicken? Of course, yes.
Yes, yeah. So this little nerdy boy with his crystal radio and all of that sort of thing, when did he get the idea that he wanted to become a doctor?
Nothing sort of about humanitarianism. I just loved the science. When I discovered that there was going to be a lot of science in the curriculum, I went for medicine, and I scored heavily. I scored high in matric, the year 12 year. So I got more than the 300 mark required. So I was invited actually to come into medical school because a certain number of students. When you scored highly, you get an invitation to university. So that's how I ended up in medical school.
So we've got this smart little mathematician, and he's good at maths, so therefore he's good at science. But there's got to be more to it than that. Did you get anything from Teacher Lil?
Oh yeah, my mother was a very kind Christian lady. Loved helping people. We lived in a poor area where my mother was the school teacher, and she did all the paperwork for people who couldn't communicate with government. She did tax returns, she wrote letters, and it's that humanitarianism which probably rubbed off a little bit.
So what about your dad?
My dad was an ordinary worker. He worked at General Motors car assembly plant in Port Elizabeth.
So how does a kid whose dad works at an assembly plant, mum's a teacher, and I dare say in those pay rates she wasn't a teacher highly paid?
No, she fell victim to a problem that feminism is now addressing, why women had to be kicked out of jobs when they got married. So she taught intermittently. But my grandfather died and left her a legacy, so she paid for the first 3 years. But the second 3 years, I made an agreement with the state government or the provincial government that for every year I get paid, if they paid my fees for a year, I give them back a year. So the last 3 years, I went through a sort of a scholarship sponsored by the provincial government in South Africa.
So tell me about that, because we're all pretty fascinated about the apartheid thing over here. We were hearing all sorts of stories and we didn't really understand much about it. Can you give us a little bit of a background as to what it was like to be a doctor in South Africa who wasn't in that elite first class of citizens, as they called it?
Well, South African society was layered. You had white on top, brown in the middle, black at the bottom. The black folk were the poor folk, so you had more disease in the black folk, you had more violence in black folk. The hospital I worked at was a third world hospital, 1,000-bedded hospital with enormous problems. I mean, you come to work in the morning and there was a queue. I think I was fortunate. I went to a good university. I went to a top university. Cape Town University was the best on the African continent. You'll agree with that, Irene, won't you? And yeah, that's Irene Crozier. Her husband and I attended the same university. Anyhow, so we were inundated with work. It was extremely busy. To give you an idea what I mean by busy, my first job as an intern was in the obstetrical and gynecology department. On a quiet month, we had 900 deliveries. On a busy month, we had 1,300 babies. For the 6 months that I spent there, we had 8,500 babies. And I was only supposed to do the complicated deliveries. I could do a forceps delivery in my sleep, vacuum extraction, cesarean sections, all of that stuff. So It was an enormous experience. Very next job, surgery. Became an expert in sticking in chest tubes because of stab chest. Whenever we went to do an operation, the consultant would come and say, watch carefully, the next one is yours. And that's how we learned. But the demand for doctors was high. We were understaffed, lots of pathology.
So you had to virtually fly by the seat of your pants, basically. You had to make up things as you went.
No, there was instruction. I mean, you got the instruction, but then you did it over and over and again, and overnight you became an expert.
Okay. What about the odd occasion where witch doctory maybe had to come into play?
I've got a witch doctor story. The black folk in South Africa had their own medical system, and it was herbalism, and there was a lot of strange herbs. I tried to understand it. In fact, John Lockwood said to Valerie, my sister sitting over there, when she had a headache, why don't you go to your mother and get a green leaf? So there was herbalism among the black folk. Before South Africa became a British colony, it was a Dutch colony, so we had the Dutch remedies, and there was a Dutch system of medicine. And then there was the Western system. And we constantly encountered witchcraft. And I was doing ENT, that was one of the departments I rotated around, and we got a referral from the physicians. They had a black man who couldn't swallow and he wouldn't talk. And the ENT department was asked to give an opinion. We looked at the guy, we started investigating, couldn't find a cause why he wouldn't swallow and why he wouldn't eat. So I took him up into the ward and we started investigating. Couldn't find out what was wrong with him. But the hospital was also a teaching hospital for nurses, and a new block of nurses came along, and on a ward round, one of them said, oh, this man is from the same tribe. She recognized the cuttings in his face. And I said, okay, seeing you're from the same tribe, what's wrong with this guy? And she said, oh, well, he's been bewitched. He's done something nasty, and the witch doctors put a spell on him. And, well, then I got a clue. The hospital also served for missionaries to come and get experience. So I met this guy who was a priest, doctor, and a missionary. And I said to him, I've got this patient who, it looks like he's been bewitched. What do I do? And he said, well, to undo witchcraft, you've got to impress the patient so much that they believe in you, and they'll undo the spell. So he said, I'll do the old hydrogen peroxide trick. Anyhow, so I go up to the ward. Now, I've got to impress these guys. I called this nurse as the interpreter. The tribe that this guy came from was called the Pondus. And I had 2 blood pressure cuffs, 2 syringes with needles on it. And I said to this guy through the interpreter that I've discovered, I spoke to the great white doctor, and he's got a spirit floating around in his body. And there was some recognition in his eyes. So I put the 2 cuffs on, and I started chanting, sang a Cliff Richard song, we're going on summer holiday. And
so we're going on a summer holiday.
Yeah, this black guy, he showed some recognition, and I explained to him through the interpreter that I'm going to try and chase this spirit that's causing him all this harm. And so I chant, suddenly I pump up the blood pressure cuff, the veins on his head stood up, and I said, oh, I think I've got him. So I put in the needle. In the meantime, I got 2 glasses of a glass of water and a glass of hydrogen peroxide. So I pulled the blood out, and I squirted it into the water, and nothing happened. Blood just swirled around. I said, okay, I missed him. Sing again, another Cliff Richard song. And I pump up the other cuff. Veins stood up. Take the new syringe. I said, I think I've got him now. Suck it up, and I shoot the blood into the hydrogen peroxide. Doctors will tell you, you mix blood with hydrogen peroxide, you get an explosion. Shh! And he said, you. And he stood up, and he asked for food, and he was healed.
Okay, Elroy, I know that doesn't work in Healesville.
You really want to know?
Yeah. So, tell me a little bit more about the pay rates and the reason why you left South Africa and how we were so fortunate for you to come here, because I think you were going elsewhere.
Part of the apartheid program was that there was this 3-4 divisions. A white doctor would get, say, $300. I was being coloured, or biracial, as Megan has told me I was. And yeah, so I would get 115, and the black guy working in the same department would get about $84, and that was the scale. And that was one of the things that we protested against, and probably one of many reasons why I left South Africa.
So you got the news that Australia was now open, the White Australia policy had changed,
That's right.
and what was the euphoria like in the hospital when that happened?
At Livingston Hospital, tea time, there are probably about 50 doctors all coming to have tea. And a guy walked in and he says, Australia's opened its door, guys. And probably 2/3 of the staff that day said, we're going. and they did.
So the brain
And
drain.
that wasn't only blacks and coloureds, and
That
it
was
was right
doctors
across the
generally,
board
yeah,
because
yeah.
South Africa was adding in, collision cause.
So there was a huge brain drain from South
Absolutely,
Africa, yet so sad that it was, really difficult for you to exist under those conditions. So
Yeah.
you need to hold it up a bit higher, yeah. So, and keep it up there. It's good to be in
Getting
charge of
tired,
Elroy. First time, he usually tells me what to do. This brain drain goes out of South Africa, but you weren't heading to Australia. What happened?
Well, I was trying to get to Canada because Barbara had left to Canada. And Canada became such a attractive focus for South Africans that the Canadian government wanted to open a processing office in Cape Town, and South Africans didn't like that. So in the process, they moved the office to Beirut, and in the process, my forms were lost. But then things got bad, and Australia being open, and there were ads in South African papers asking doctors to come to Australia, and that's
Okay.
what I responded to.
So you jumped on a ship.
Yep,
What was the ship?
the Northern Star.
Northern Star. And you're heading across from South Africa. And what are you thinking?
About the fact that Scotch was cheaper on the boat.
Yeah. Anything else?
Oh, look, I mean, there was a whole group of, there were 60 families from all with the same story. And well, we were expectant, we were optimistic. You couldn't be sad about the whole thing, but
So it was an adventure.
it was an adventure. I was
Okay.
young.
And the great adventure ended where? Where did you start? In
Well,
Victoria.
the ship pulled in at Station Pier, and South Melbourne in those days was absolutely crap. I mean, the weatherboard, harbour sheds and railway shed. And we all got off the boat and said, my God, is this Melbourne?
I know, I lived
Yeah,
there.
you lived there, yeah. Anyhow, that didn't discourage, so we...
Yeah. And then
Anyhow.
where'd you go?
Well, I heard at the time, I did a quick work experience course with friends in Dufton, 2 doctors who were South African. But then I heard that there were a number of country towns that were looking for doctors, and that was throughout Victoria. So I rang the health department and said, I'm here, and I'm available. And the response was amazing. I got straight to the Secretary of Health, one step down from the minister. He sent a car. I was processed and said, yep, would you help us out with a town called Murrayville? There had been a bad accident in Murrayville. 3 children were killed by a heavy semi-trailer, and the country party and the local residents were agitating to get a doctor, and I came along at that time to
So-
offer my services.
How long does it take for a doctor to get registered these days?
Geez, a long time.
A year?
Well, the new foreign graduates have to sit for about 3 exams. They process through immigration. They got to plug into the Rural Doctors Association and get placed in various practices. And that's what we're doing at the moment. We're mentoring foreign graduates. And yep, a long time and lots of money.
And how long did it take you?
I arrived on the 16th. On the 18th, I was registered quite informally.
And how many hours did it take you from the time you met the registrar or the person who was doing it to you were...
The guy, I walked into this building next to the Victorian Parliament, and this gentleman had white socks on, and he looked very informal. G'day, mate. What can I do for you? Where do I register? He said, right here. I said, what do you need from me? He said, you got your certificate, you got your degree? Yes. You got your clearance from the South African Medical Association? Yes. Do you want anything else? And he looked at the certificate. He said, oh, Cape Town University. I said, do you want anything other, references and so? He said, mate, you come from the uni that did the first heart transplant. You guys are great.
Yeah.
And
So he sent you off to where?
he walked to the door with me, said, that's Collins Street, that's Burke Street. You wander down there, get something to eat, come back at 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock I came back and he gave me my practicing certificate, which is on my wall at the moment.
And then you got actually sent up there all by yourself, or what?
No, I was actually the secretary of the Department of Health, drove me up there to meet the board and sort of get an appraisal of what I had to do. And I said, well, it depends a lot on what the other doctor was. Because from Oyen, you all know Oyen is on that road leading down to Adelaide. There was one doctor in Oyen, I was going to be the doctor in Marieville, and then another doctor in Pinnaroo, and a bloke that came infrequently in Lameroo. So an enormous length of huge catchment. There was only going to be really 2 functional doctors.
And mainly flat plains and sandhills, nothing much else.
The fauna and flora was simple. It was gum trees, magpies, wheat and sheep, and that was it. Easy to understand.
Yeah. So what's it like being a doctor, a GP in Murrayville? Tell me some of the experiences you had there.
Well, fortunately, the experience kicked in. I mean, good university, good experience. So I could virtually do everything. But I'm remembered in Murrayville not for surgery. I did about 10 tonsillectomies and I delivered about 10 babies there. I'm remembered for doing a cesarean section on a dog. Early one morning, about 7 o'clock, frantic knock on the door, and it was the bank manager's wife who told me that she's scared that her silky-haired bitch was pregnant from the high school principal's Great Dane. And she was quite annoyed at the Great Dane. But anyhow,
Just imagine that for a minute, folks.
She had the dog in a car. So I went. Now, I had no veterinary experience up to that stage. Examined the dog. I said, well, this is an obstructed labor. And she said, well, what will happen? I said, well, if nothing is done, this dog is going to die, and it's probably going to die within the next 2 hours. And she said, well, what would you do? I said, well, if this was a human being, a cesarean section has to be done. So she said, can you do a cesarean section? Well, the vet was in Mildura, the other vet was in Adelaide. This was the 70s. And I said, well, if you're willing to try, I'll do a cesarean section. So I took that dog into the hospital's laundry. The matron was a great friend of mine, Robin Dawson, who he met with me. Anyhow, so put a swab of ether on the dog's nose. The dog promptly stopped breathing. So the matron was pushing the chest in the old Holger Nielsen fashion, and the dog we kept the dog alive. So I did a slash, pulled the 3 pups out, stitched it up together. The dog woke up in half an hour's time. Well, it took about half an hour to wake up, and immediately looked better. Drank some milk and was running around, and the dog's life was saved. So the lady rings the Loxton radio station and said, our new South African doctors just saved my dog. And the Pinnaroo Times decided to report this in typical paparazzi fashion.
So you're cross-state now.
Fugitive doctor saves dog.
Okay, fugitive doctor. So you not only saved dogs, but you obviously did a good job with the people. And like Ian was saying before, your job was to cure people, and you cured them so well that there were very few left to cure, and you had to find somewhere to go,
The
didn't
town
you?
only had 600 people, and there was another 200 in the district, and the amount of work was getting very little. I had a good relationship with the doctor in Pinnaroo, so I was going across the border every morning. He would come across the border and help me. But after a while, we'd sort of, all the backlog that took place before I came there, we had got rid of that. And there were some days when I actually went to the high school and taught.
Okay. Now, I seem to recall you telling me a story about one night you felt peckish and you wanted to go and get, was it McDonald's or Kentucky?
It was a hamburger, yeah.
A hamburger. He needed a hamburger.
So I drove 600 miles to Adelaide to go and buy a hamburger.
And was it good?
Fantastic.
Fantastic. Okay. So you've gone from Murrayville and you've come back here, you did the right thing, you stayed around until you found a replacement doctor.
Yeah, I did that, yes.
Yeah. And then what brought you to Healesville?
Well, the story of Healesville was in 1971, at about August, Stuart Willocks, a Scottish general surgeon who arrived in Yarraglen in 1963, and Ernest Johnson, a Chinese South African orthopedic surgeon who arrived in Healesville at 69, amalgamated practices. They were both surgeons, they knew nothing about anesthetics, and they wanted an anesthetist because they wanted to start a surgical unit in Healesville, based at the Healesville Hospital. So fortuitously, a friend rang me to ask if he could come to Murrayville for a holiday. Ernie happened to be in the same room. Said, who are you talking to? I'm talking to Elroy. Elroy anesthetist, yes. So Ernie Johnson said, you want to come and have a look at us? So we traveled down to Melbourne, Barb and I, and we went to see the show Hair. So that's about the time period. And had an interview, and I said, okay, I'll come. And December in 1971, I came to join the Yarra Valley Clinic. I was doctor number 3, and the rest is history.
Yeah. So tell me about Healesville in the 70s, early 70s.
Healesville in the
what was it like?
70s, the selling point at Ernest Johnson, he did everything to persuade me to come. And he gave me a sketch of the town. He said there's a 20-bed hospital, it's got a labor ward, it's got a theatre, operating theatre, that the town was a timber town, that there was about 12 timber mills. The town had all of these guest houses that had been converted to special accom and residential care. There was an army school, and that was Healesville, quiet, sort of weatherboard town with a timber industry.
Okay, so you rolled up your sleeves and you got into it. Did you find, what was the major thing you found different from the clientele, the patients?
There wasn't much different from South Africa. People got sick in the same way, and people presented earlier in Australia. In South Africa, with poverty and lack of education, people presented at the end stage of disease. When you listen to a chest and you hear the tide flushing in and out, you know this is cardiac failure, that the person's going to die. Whereas in Australia, cardiac patients present on the other end of the spectrum where they're just tired and they still haven't got the pulmonary edema. So that was sort of patients in Australia presented much earlier on the spectrum of the disease.
Okay. So Healesville in the early days, you met, I think we saw you after about 6 years. I think you might have been here before we came.
Yeah, in the 70s.
Yeah, it was in the 70s we came down, and straight away I figured that you were going to be a good doctor. So I kind of stayed with you for that time. And Leah,
yeah, you had done a crazy thing by diving in the swimming pool at a river without checking the depth.
Elroy, this is about you, not me. Yeah, I had. And Leah independently came, and we both got together that afternoon, and I'd come back from school where I was and she from hers, and we said, oh, we've got this new doctor. So that's where we're coming from. But tell me a little bit about those days of experiences you had. Perhaps talk about some of the special accommodation experiences you had.
The special accommodation home was something else. The special accommodation homes in those days was looking after homeless people. Sad stories came out of that. There were quite a few on the highway. You had Manor House, which had about 45 people. Up Lawless Road, there was Pauline O'Brien's Homewood. She started off as a special accom with taking about 8 patients. But Homewood is a success story, and I'm looking at Elaine Doss as I'm saying this. The O'Briens, Pauline O'Brien and Basil, formed a consortium with Elaine and Keith Dosser, and Homewood Hospital got built, and that hospital has flourished. Peter Trick looks after it now, and I think 100 patients, Peter? Oh. So that was Homewood. Going down the town, turn up Don Road. Opposite the cemetery was Schofield, and in direct line of vision from Schofield down Mount Riddle Road was the Russian home. Further up Don Road was the Chateau, which was renamed Healesville District Hospital that became down St. Leonard's Road. Years later on, there was Grace Fields that was purpose-built. Go up McGregor Avenue, and then there was Monda, which I still look after. Further up the Myers, there was Bethany and Sunspot. And these were the special outcomes. These were the homes that Bryn Jones over there writes about. They were the tourist town. They were the tourist facilities in the turn of the last century.
But can you tell us some stories about one of them, maybe?
Yeah, there was some very interesting stories. I'll just choose the light-hearted one. I mean, John Lockwood had probably his worst experience when one patient killed another one at Mana, and that was gory. Can't tell that story. But
Don't.
it was amazing the sort of people that ended up in special accom homes. People have fallen on bad times. There was a lovely lady there, spoke with a plum, private school education, had married a politician, looking at Cindy McLeish. Yeah. And she wore expensive clothing, but her family had got rid of her because she was an alcoholic. She's a petty thief. And while she was at Mana House, Mrs. Shorten was getting very distressed because she was stealing other people's stuff. So one morning, Mrs. Shorten decided we're going to have a magistrate's court. She called this lady in, and she said, and this lady arrived. She used to smoke cigarettes through an ivory holder, long cigarette holder, and she wore a fascinator, the sort of hat that women wear to the Melbourne Cup.
You had
She
a name
waltzed-
for her, didn't you?
Pardon?
You had a name for her.
Oh, I called her Mae West. She had that personality. So Mrs. Shorten says to her, "I'm very disappointed in you. You not behaving properly. You're stealing people's stuff. You're stealing cigarettes. You're stealing makeup. If you don't behave yourself, I'm going to kick you out." And this lady straightens up with her cigarette. She says, "Madam, I have been kicked out of better places than this."
Okay, some very fast-paced questions now. This is like they do in the footy show, so it's a bit like a footy show. You're only allowed to give me an answer with one or two sentences. So,
We'll try.
fast-paced. Okay. Yarra Valley Clinics had seen some changes over the last few years, or many years since you've been there. What would you say the biggest change that you've noticed in the clinic?
We grew. The practice expanded to 7 doctors. We had a brown surgery in Yarra Glen and in Coldstream, and then we contracted again. So there was only 2 of us now owning the practice, myself and Peter. But the clinic got involved with various teaching programs. We got involved with the College of GPs, family planning, family medicine program. So we did a lot of mentoring. All of us sort of instructed young doctors. We looked after them. So that was a real positive. A lot of praise for that scheme. And we grew and then contracted, and we looked after the foreign medical graduates under the rural doctor scheme. So we got involved with the Division of General Practice, which is the instrumentality that brought out the after-hours clinics. Peter and I and John were greatly involved. We supported and helped initiate the practice nurse program, and Elaine is sitting over there, one of the practice nurses, and Kathy. So there was an evolution to accommodate
Just expand.
technology and accommodate the various programs that the government sort of thought of.
Okay, as your doctor here at the moment, I'd say that's more than 1 or 2 sentences, but anyway. Tell me about the changes in medicine, in technology that's happened.
Oh, well, I mean, in 50 years, it's just been amazing. There isn't an aspect of medicine that hasn't changed because of technology. When we started in the 70s, there was a war surplus x-ray machine at Healesville. Looked like a dinosaur. And Stuart and Ernie and I were instructed to get a certificate of radiography so that we can operate this thing. And when the guy rang me up and he said, "You'll have to get a certificate before you can take x-rays," and I said, "Make sure I get the shifting spanner and the screwdriver to fix that machine." So anyhow, you know, if you look at imaging, for instance, you went x-rays, you CT scans, ultrasound, MRIs, magnetic resonance, scopes, fiber optics were invented, and you can look around corners with it. So gastroscopes, colonoscopes, straight out endoscopes, breath testing. That's made diagnosis accurate and easier, and that I think would be probably the major development in 50 years for me.
Okay, what's given you the greatest pleasure being a doctor? Simple,
Well,
1 or 2 sentences.
This can't be a 1 or 2 sentences because I've got a long story to tell for that. Part of that, making accurate diagnosis and making a difference in somebody's life was great. But there's one story that goes back to Healesville being a timber town. These timber mills and chainsaws caused a lot of problems and severe injuries. And I'll go straight to the story. The timber workers in this town had black hands, and I used to call this the black hand syndrome. The sap from the timber that they cut stained their hands, and they all had black hands. It wasn't the mafia, it was just the timber workers. One morning, Ernest Johnson and I had finished the morning list, and we were just going out of the hospital when a ute came screeching in, and I called the story of the ute without a dog. There wasn't a dog on the ute, but there was a man on the ute, and this bloke was screaming in agony. This taught me what chainsaws can do. This man was working in a place called Granite Ridge in Buxton, which is a long way from Healesville. And he was standing on the ridge, and he had his one leg up, and he lost chainsaw full blast, champions. He brought the chainsaw down, and he 2/3 amputated his leg, but not fully. There was 1/3 left. His colleagues rallied around him, grabbed a dirty old overall, tried to stop the bleeding by just padding it, tied a rope, and they drove him on the back of a ute from Buxton. So Ernie and I went across to the ute, looked at this guy, and we didn't see sawdust, but we saw bone dust. And Ernie, he said, okay, back into theater. Shouted at Doris Vouring, who was the theater nurse, get ready, we're going to try and put this guy's leg together. I was looking at the anesthetic point of view. I said to this fellow, what happened? And he vaguely told me what happened. And I said, did you have smoko at this stage of getting fluid in Ocker's saying? And he said, yes, he had a 2/3 flask of coffee and 4 sandwich. So now I got a new problem. Somebody that's almost bled out, and he's got a full stomach. And the doctors here would tell you that's not a good recipe for anesthetics. Anyhow, we got this guy into the theater, and Ernest did a brilliant job. He couldn't have landed at a better spot because Ernest was a top-class orthopedic surgeon. And so while the operation went on, I called Barbara, I said, bring back my camera, and I photographed the thing in stages. And, well, it was success. I mean, it had to transfuse the man, antibiotics, and it was quite a process. It took us about 2 hours. The result was good. 5 days later, I brought the photographs around, showed him, and he collapsed. But the result was good, and that is something that will stay. I think that happened in about 1974. The story went around the town. Every black-hand man looked at those photographs, and that's my timber story.
So you're known for saving legs and getting baby dogs out of mummy dogs that shouldn't have had the sex in the first place. Okay, I am going to stop. I've got some more questions, but I'm going to stop because I know that in this audience we've got a lot of people who are going to ask questions.
Oh my God.
So this is questions without notice.
Liz, are you going to help me on this one?
And we'll have some questions. We won't be able to get round everybody, I'm sure. But if we have anyone who's watching via internet, whichever mediums, you can type in a comment there. We'll get the comment through and we can take something from the live stream that we've got. However, who's got a question? First questions, and then I'm going to call on a few people to say a few words at the end. So if you've got a big long statement, comment or whatever, you can leave that till the end.
Ask Elaine Dosser. She used to work for me.
Question.
Or ask Janice, that she used to work for me too.
No, we've got no questions. Oh, okay. One question. Okay. Now remember the protocol rules. You just got to speak into the mic. Hang on. Wait a minute. There you go.
Thank you. There's 3 doctors together, and they couldn't come to an agreement who was to do what. So I used to order a meal down at the
Andrews,
mhm,
Andrew Palos.
at one of the hotels, and they were all sent down there on a Friday lunch to work out their problems, and I kept the office going.
See you, girl. That is exactly what
Elaine, I love you.
They're all nodding down there, Elroy.
Yeah, that's, for those who don't know, that's our staff sitting there.
Okay. Any other questions?
Oh, the governor.
Well, here we go. Chair. No, not Chair. Alma.
Thank you.
No, they're not allowed to hold it. Michael said don't hold the thing. I don't know why.
Don't what? Don't.
Don't hold this. I've been holding it all night.
You're going to hold it. Okay. Sorry, Elroy. Look, this is my question now. My mental arithmetic is pretty reasonable, and so you've been a doctor in this town for 50 years.
Not in this town. I was registered on the 18th of February for Victoria, and I started up. My 50 years is up in
Okay.
December in Healesville.
So 50 years in December.
In December.
So you arrived in Healesville as an already experienced doctor.
Yep.
So 50 years plus primary school, high school, university, time as a doctor, working in hospitals.
77 years old.
That adds up to that adds up to quite a few years. So I want to know what your beauty regime is and where can I get it?
My
Hang on,
moisturizer,
I've got the answer
darling.
here. Just a minute. I'll get the answer for you. What is it, Bub? Hang on. No, sorry. I meant Bell.
As my son would say, black doesn't crack.
Okay. Any more questions? We have one down here. Okay, this could be a question
Now,
certainly
before
without notice.
Before you
all right?
ask the question, Michael is a retired mechanic and he's under my mentorship. He's becoming a sex therapist. Is that right, girls?
This question is not allowed to have anything to do with sex or any of that sort of stuff, Michael. No, okay.
Who was your favourite patient, or not favourite, but the most character, or the funniest? Not with the buck.
Not you.
Why?
Oh, Michael's a great mechanic, and he's come to the rescue of many people, and he's a real humanitarian. Michael's foot size is 9, but he wears a size 13 goofy boot. He believes he has to be comfortable.
I think he read something about the size of your foot compared to something else. We have other questions? No more. You must have something, Neville. With all those years that you spent, you didn't mention about Neville, so how about you tell them something about Neville? Yeah.
Neville and I had a fantastic relationship. One night, the circus came to town in Yarra Glen, and the trapeze artist was a very powerfully built man. He was short though, and he was epileptic, and there's a link with epilepsy and psychosis. This guy had an epileptic fit. He was unconscious. Jim McGregor brought him to the hospital. When he got to the hospital, he woke up, and he then attacked Jim. I got the call by Sister McIntyre, who said, "Come quickly, he's flushing Jim down the sink." So we had a bit of a tussle. Fortunately, the South African experience kicked in. Fortunately, the nurse also rang Neville, and it was the first night of his duty in Healesville. He still had black hair, and he arrived, and we wrestled this guy down, and we put him in a straitjacket. Did you bring the straitjacket, Neville? No, we had great hard times with Neville. Got a call one morning. Some of you may remember the Jaka escapees that had the whole town on edge. Well, they were caught. So Neville wanted to be kind. Calls me, I've got to check these guys out, whether they're fit enough to go back into prison. He leaves me alone in a back room at the cop shop. And I thought, all the cops were celebrating that they found the things, and they were drinking beer in the middle of the day. And I was left alone with these escapees. These are hardened criminals. I mean, my God, I could have been captured. I could have been held to ransom. Neville, it was great working with you, pal.
I think you'd think they'd heard the Ian Tinney stories, and that's probably why they left you with them. There's a couple of people who have indicated they'd like to
I've
say
gone to
something,
elevate.
but you've got a question. Now, this is certainly... No, you can't hold the thing. It's a thing about it. I don't know what it is.
It's not so much a question, it's just an observation. There is a patient in this town who remembers seeing Elroy in Murrayville. I mentioned this to Elroy, and he told me his history from 50 years ago. Now, I have no idea what I did last week. But I sorry, folks, but I just thought that was amazing.
Okay, so when you go to this man and you see him looking up his notes, you'll understand why. Leah Hill, you said you would like to say something.
Okay. My first visit to Elroy was a short visit. Can't remember what it was for, but I thought he's a nice man. So when Troy had a very sore throat, I took him along to Elroy, and Troy was a very if anyone knows Troy now, you wouldn't know him as this little frightened 4-year-old, terrified. And Elroy saw that he had to have his tonsils out. So along we go to the hospital, and there are kids bouncing everywhere. I don't know how many tonsillitis things you had that day, but there were about 4 or 5 kids jumping on beds.
ADHD.
And Troy was terrified, you know. He just was... Anyway, I had to leave him, got there the next morning, and he's in his little bed looking up, and I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yes, Dr. Schroeder looked after me and made me feel better." And that was the first thing, and that has gone on and on. I'm not going to go on and on, but I truly believed he has saved Terry's life, my life, and the 2 boys' lives. I won't go into details, but the last one was me going 18 months ago in with a sore throat. So Elroy says, "No, your throat's fine." I'm thinking, what? That's really sore. So then he started to have a look at feel my chest with the, what do you call it? Stethoscope.
Didn't feel it, just listened to
Listened to my chest. Sorry, he didn't feel it. He just listened. And he listened in, and then he said, "Your heart." And I burst out laughing because I thought he was making a joke. He was not making a joke.
Yeah, and I called Gordon to verify what I was
called
saying.
Gordon in, and he said the same thing. I ended up with Siobhan to look after me, so it's a real family thing.
And now you've got a zipper.
Yep, and I had a big operation. And how long was it, Siobhan? 8 hours or something? Terrible.
I'm glad you mentioned Siobhan, because she's going to talk
It
next.
was Elroy, yes, saving us all. Terry had things, Marcus had things happen, and Elroy was there, always there. But one of the best things he did for me, he provided me with a best friend, Barbie. Thank you.
Okay, Siobhan.
Am I?
You want to come up here, Siobhan.
For those who don't know Siobhan, she's my niece, and she's a cardiologist at Monash Heart.
Yes, true. I'm just going to hold fire on your story for a moment, but I'd like to offer my congratulations to Ian, who was actually my first ever GP mentor as a medical student, who gifted me a skeleton in a box that then sat in my bedroom, and I was terrified as a medical student because there was like a small dead woman in a box at the end of the bed. But I still have a said skeleton, so thank you and congratulations on your career in tonight. So it's my pleasure to talk, I guess, on behalf of the family. Sean would have done it if he was here because he loves a microphone and an audience. So it's really lovely to see as many people who are here tonight. And I also noticed there are a few of my patients in the room, so I hope you all had the salmon and passed on the dessert. And my patients are here because Elroy has become my greatest referrer. So as a specialist, we spend a lot of time working relationships with GPs because it's all about patient referral, but I didn't have to work a relationship. We have a hotline. I see the number call. It's usually Liz. "Hi Siobhan, it's Liz. Uncle A has a patient. Can he talk to you?" I'm like, yes, yeah, right now. So it's like the bat phone, so definite hotline. And obviously I love looking after the community that I grew up in. The only downside is that I work an hour away. So, but it's always nice to have a good working relationship with amazing GPs. Elroy has been, in fact, it's weird to call him Elroy, so Uncle A is how my brother and I refer to him. I think it was because I couldn't say Elroy as a small child, but Uncle A it was, and oh God, now I'm going to cry. Uncle A it still is, except it's really transitioned to EC, so Elroy Cyril Schroeder. Has been an amazing support for me. I'm very privileged to have multiple mentors, and my father was one of them. And I think it's weird, but being here amongst everybody and celebrating you tonight has sort of brought him back. So it's nice to be able to do that, and it's nice to be home, I guess. But anyway, I'll try and stop crying. Barbie's not one for a speech, so I would like to take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of the family for being so amazing, on behalf of your community who love you as much as we do. So, thank you.
Well, I think on that note, it sort of sums up what people feel about you, Elroy, but do you have any last sort of comments that you'd like to make?
Well, the only
to
thing I'm
thank
going to
people?
say is thank you. And if I can start off with a wide angle view, how do you thank Australia? This country has made an enormous difference to our lives, and on behalf of my family, Cindy, can you convey to Australia that we love this country and thank you? Focusing down to the Yarra Valley, staff sitting over there, Gordon and Peter there. Great team of people I'm doing the same. Just thank you. Lastly, to the woman who feeds me, Barbara. Whenever I used to deliver babies, the phone, and she was woken up by, Alison would say the same, the wives are woken up by the phone calls and they come at all hours. I would go down to the Healesville Hospital, deliver a baby, come back, and Barbara would always wake up and say, what sex was it? She always wanted to know the sex of the baby. So Barb and Terry, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay, so we've mentioned Barbie, we've mentioned Cindy, Ruth, you got a mention just a minute ago, so can Barbie, Ruth, Cindy come up here, please? Okay, Cindy, would you like to say a few words on behalf of the government? Because Elroy's asked you to do that. I'll give you the mic because I think all the COVID's rubbed off. No, I've got to go. Use this one.
What an amazing night this has been. How fabulous it's been to celebrate 50 years of service for Elroy as a doctor. It's amazing, and to hear Ian's stories. And I think what former Prime Minister, a couple of Prime Ministers ago, said, anyone born in Australia has hit the jackpot of life already, and coming to Australia you would understand and know that. And we have been blessed in the Yarra Valley to have the doctors here, and to hear the stories tonight were really amazing. And things have changed somewhat over 50 years, but one thing that hasn't changed is the expectations and the community's expectations on the doctors and what they do so willingly. And we just heard it a moment ago about the phones ringing in the middle of the night and what you have to do and get up to do. And so Rotary, not only did they want to tonight recognise the great work of the doctors, but also the role that their wives have played suffering along with them and providing food, feeding them, because that's also a big part of helping them be the best that they can in our community. So we have a small gift for the wives. Barb first. I wondered where they were.
They could dribble a little.
Oh yeah, on behalf of Rotary for you, isn't that lovely? And for Ruth.
Also dribbly.
Yeah, there we are, Ruth. Whoa. Oh, they are dribbly, aren't they? They're very dribbly. So there we are, Terry.
Thank you very much,
Thank you, Cindy.
Very, very nice of you. Thanks. You right, Barb? Okay. I'd like to call Michael to the stage with Alma. Thank you. You can stay. Sit.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
And you.
Thank you, Terry. Could everyone please give Terry and Elroy a round of applause for a fantastic Q&A session? So Elroy, on behalf of the Rotary Club of Healesville, it gives me great pleasure to extend our thanks and gratitude for your tireless service to the community over the 50 years of you being a GP here and abroad. I think you can all agree with me that very few people in this community have had such a positive impact on the health and well-being of the entire Healesville community as Elroy has. On a quick personal note as well, I want to thank you for the positive impact you've had on my family. I know many people have similar stories. We've heard from Terry, we've heard from Leah. Passing my mum in a hallway at the clinic a number of years ago, you picked up on a dark spot on her face. And basically straight away you said, hey, we need to get this checked out, because it looked a bit suspicious. Now that dark spot turned out to be a malignant melanoma. I just learned that word, thank you, Elroy. And it was really serious, so before we knew it, Mum was off to hospital to have life-saving treatment. And I really think that if you weren't in the right place at the right time then and didn't have the experience that you had as a doctor, there's a very, very good chance that she would not be here today. So on behalf of my family, we're eternally grateful, and I wanted to thank you for that as well. So. I think it's also important to note that it does take a team of people to help Elroy have the impact that he does in the community. And you have an incredible team at the Yarra Valley Clinic, some very dedicated health professionals, and the whole team's just incredible. So could you please join me in thanking the whole team at Yarra Valley Clinic as well. So Elroy, it does give me great pleasure on behalf of the Rotary Club of Healesville to present you with, I suppose, a token of our appreciation for your service to the community. We hope that this plaque here will sort of play a small role in recognising your achievements in the community for many years to come, and we hope you'll hang it up in a place that's meaningful to you. So there we go, Elroy. Could you please all join me in thanking Elroy Schroeder? Thank you. And before you go, there is one more thing I would like to present to you, and we have District Governor Alma Reynolds up here to help with us. Elroy, it also gives us great pleasure tonight to also present you with the Paul Harris Fellow Sapphire Award. So congratulations.
Allow me to pin this on you.
So as I mentioned earlier, this award is very distinguished in Rotary. It's one of the highest honours you can receive in Rotary. It's a tribute to our founder from Rotary International, and we really think that Elroy is a very, very worthy candidate of this award for all of the tireless service he has had over the 50 years of serving as a GP. So, ladies and gentlemen, could you please be upstanding once more to thank Dr. Elroy Schroeder.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. You can now...
And may I just say thank you, Michael. Thank you, Terry, for putting this all together. Thank you, Rotary. I was a member of this club, a founding member, and I really enjoyed it. Major projects was the directory, which Terry thought of and I put together, and I believe that earns the club a fair bit of money. The photographs that Ian Whites and I and Ray Church did for the Historical Society. The ambulance vehicle that was done in my presidential year. And just on the whole, I enjoyed the years in Rotary. Phenomenal organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Elroy. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Alma, as well. You can now be seated. Thanks very much. So for our virtual viewers, that is where we will say goodbye tonight. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed celebrating this incredible celebration with us. So we hope to see you at another Rotary event very soon, either in person or virtually in the years to come. So to our virtual viewers, thank you and good night.